Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage Marketing Professor and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today, we have a very special guest, Bo Bothe, who is the president and CEO of BrandExtract, considered one of the best branding firms in the United States. BrandExtract is a Houston-based company that provides strategic guidance, helping clients grow their businesses through data-driven strategies, branding, marketing, and digital services. BrandExtract was named one of the fastest-growing agencies by Adweek magazine in 2023. Bo himself is a father, a husband, a sports coach, a passionate volunteer. He's won numerous awards, namely the Houston Business Journal's inaugural 40 Under 40, the Rice Jones School Alumni Service Award, and a bunch of others. When he's not at home work or volunteering, he's a City of Spring, Texas council member, part of the Kareem Jackson Foundation, a board member of the Family Houston and San Jacinto Museum of History. He's also the founder of ESG Reporting Partners, and he's a former contributor to the Forbes Agency Council. That's a whole lot, but so impressive. How are you doing, Bo?
I'm good, Danny. How are you? Embarrassing there. And Kareem Jackson was traded, so there's a different one there, but it's all good.
I'm glad you find a little bit of time for your business, right?
Yeah, just a tiny bit.
Let's jump right in. Where did you go to school and what did you study?
I went to Texas Tech, graphic designer by trade, and then did design work for years, and then went back to Rice and got my MBA, the Jones School. So that I could have better conversations with my clients about the stuff we were making, and that turned into branding.
Are there any experiences both inside and outside the classroom that were most impactful in directing your path?
So one, I lucked or stumbled into a logic class. I thought I was going to take a philosophy class that was all about, the earth is some molecule in your hand. I thought that was going to be that thing. And it ends up being, theorems and like if-then statements. And it was basically a thinking class, about building good arguments. And it was one of the best experiences I ever had. On top of learning how to be a designer and communicate with visuals and elements and all that kind of stuff. And then spin that into a career and then into Rice. Dwayne Windsor was just mentioned on LinkedIn this week. It was one of my professors, leadership and ethics. One of the most formative conversations I had with my classmates was he walked in the room and he's like, we were watching 12 O'Clock High, I think it was the name of the movie. And, you're trying to get somebody to go bomb Japan and nobody's going to come back. And can you get anybody to come do it? And Dwayne walks in and he goes, leaders manipulate, go. And it was one of the most incredible conversations about just getting people to move and inspiring people for good and bad. And how do you use things? And so those are some seminal kind of things that have happened in my education on top of just technical learning that really kind of stuck with me, communication and leadership and kind of making things go in the world and in your life.
I know these days there's some discussion around, is it worth getting an MBA? So can you tell me a little about your MBA experience when you look back at, was it worth it? And also now when you're looking at hiring people, do you find that an MBA is something that's of value?
Kind of funny. I'm a big dude. I lack confidence a lot. I've had, and historically I thought I was small, but I was basically playing basketball and football in the land of giants all the time. And 6'4" is not that big in that universe. And so there are things that I've historically thought, oh, well, I need this or I need that to kind of be my shield of armor. And the MBA was one of those. I was really able to kind of lean in and learn a language and think of things differently. The other side of that, the network that I got, the great friends that I got out of it, the technical learning was outstanding. The professors were amazing. The Rice network, much like any great business school, is incredible. But at the end of the day, I was trying to build some confidence. I ended up with an incredible network of very thoughtful people that will be with me for my lifetime. And so the investment beyond the education piece, because if it were just the education, you're getting the full-time MBA and you're just learning how to do a spreadsheet, that turns into kind of a technical, traded up into a job that pays me more. That wasn't what I was looking to do. And this executive MBA, having 10 years of experience and then getting into it was just phenomenal. So I think, for listeners, if they're considering an MBA, I'd get a little bit of professional experience to have context and to how you want to apply that business knowledge. But an MBA is also a great way to change the game career wise. I thought it was great. It was a lot of money. It's a lot more money now after 20 years. So there's a little bit of an ROI thing. You got to really get into it.
Do you look for master's degrees at all for the people that you're hiring?
Not really. I think today it is, I wouldn't say easy. It shows commitment, but we look for hustle. I barely look at resumes anymore. I mean, they can be so faked and they are what they are. And so we have a pretty grueling interview to where you meet with a number of people in big groups and small groups and all that kind of stuff, just to get to where people can be themselves, to see whether they fit us and we fit them. But from a, if somebody has an MBA or has an advanced degree, it will rise to the top to say, hey, look, let's give this a look.
So, Bo, how would you define a mentor?
A guide. I've had a number of mentors in my life. I work best with drill sergeants. If I'm looking for a mentor, I'm looking for someone to tell me what they think I should do. And I'm enough of a contrarian to then choose not to do what they say, but because I know who I am. But I think a good mentor is a guide. One of the things that I've learned in my EO experiences and my group learning experiences has been the idea of Gestalt. A good mentor can bring experiences to the table and not really tell you what you have to do, but can give you kind of, in these situations, this thing happened. It sounds a lot like what's going on with you, or just somebody that can give you some context. I'd put them in that kind of guide, whether spiritual or emotional kind of side of things or business standpoint. Those are the kind of mentors that I do really well with. There are ones that are kind of want to run alongside you or walk behind you and let you kind of lead.
But how does that balance with that drill sergeant? Because you mentioned at the beginning, like, I like someone who's a drill sergeant. How does that match with someone who's a guide, a leader? Do you feel like you can find someone who has both?
Yeah, I think so. I think that there's a point where when I'm working with a mentor and I think my mentor style, there's a point where the mentee is typically trying to get over a hurdle. They're usually trying to get over a hump. Like I use the MBA to get me over a hump in my confidence. The decision's not really that hard. Mentoring someone like me who can overthink, there is a point where somebody's going to need to stand up and say, look, this is not that big a deal, make a decision. The drill sergeant kind of mentor works with me because that level of confidence really kind of has an impact on me, where someone more like super contrarian would not like that kind of role. And so when you think about a mentor, I think there's that guide piece, and then there are these different personalities of those. There was an old Harvard Business Review, I think, or Wall Street Journal article, I can't remember which, that kind of broke mentors up into these kind of 4 categories. There's the wide sage, there's the drill sergeant, there's the spiritual guide, and then there's the psychologist, the one that is like, what do you think about that? I never will give you an answer. I think when people are working with mentors, you may need a different one at different times.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think there's one person who can be the mentor for you throughout your whole life in some ways, right? Like you need different people at different points.
Yeah. I mean, like we'll talk about my dad, incredible mentor for me, but like there was a point where I couldn't hear him, and I think we all get like that. To where it's, okay, now it's time for me. It's just a normal growth thing.
So let's actually talk about your dad. Why do you put him as one of your most influential mentors?
I can't remember if we talked about it when we got together, but my father grew up incredibly poor. He recreated himself, lied his way in the Marine Corps when he was 17, found my mom at an embassy in Tokyo, Japan. She's from Pittsburgh. He's from Texas City. Decided that he was thinking about my mom and the family that he was going to create with her in the foxhole while getting shot at. So decided he didn't want to be in the military anymore, got into the carpet business, recreated that whole thing, grew the business, bought it from my uncle, and then lost the business in the late 80s, went bankrupt, restarted in, selling insurance and got into financial planning, and then started a prison ministry, and then had a spiritual life as a deacon. And I mean, there was just a constant, I can always do it with him. And there was a constant positive outlook in the world. When we would get up in the morning, he would just be yelling in the house, I feel terrific. I feel outstanding. It's going to be a great day. And a little bit of it was he was trying to convince himself that it was going to be a great day. Because you can imagine all the stuff he's had to deal with in his life. He was relentless. He just never stopped. He never stopped being positive. He never stopped believing and being strong in his faith. He was always there for us from a family standpoint. He was always there, just committed to my mother. They put each other's wedding rings on every time they take them off to work in the yard or whatever. They put them back on each other's fingers. From a business standpoint, from a life standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, he was just unconventional, but rock solid. I get down and I get up, but I never, and I kind of have high highs and low lows. The Italian in me lets it go sometimes, but there's never something I can't overcome. And I think that was something he taught me as my kind of mentor in life. And he picked graphic design. We were driving up to tech and he was like, I don't think you want to do advertising. I think this design thing is what you want to do. Because he's looking through the book. He was just really thoughtful and listened. Like Marines are super personal. I mean, it's like a family kind of thing. And he just was, man, he had vision and insightful and not like kind of normal dad story. He could do anything, but just watching that experience through my life and thinking about his life, where he came from and what he did, it was incredible. Forrest Gump.
That's what he sounds like. Like I get goosebumps just, you talking about him. What a remarkable man. Really.
Yeah, I was very blessed and very lucky to have had him in my life. There's a Jesuit prayer that you can do, which is more of just a meditation. And one of the things is, like thank whatever, the metaphysical God or whatever it is you believe in, just give thanks. And every time I think, man, thank God for my dad and my mom, because I hit the freaking jackpot with them. I mean, totally. So it's a lot of why, and I look just like him. So it's a lot of why I am who I am, except for he had a giant head. Like, I would say that he had a giant face and this really tiny head. So none of his hats, like his cowboy hats and stuff, won't fit me. That's the only difference between the two of us.
So obviously he was someone that you looked up to and you watched him and learned from him. How about conversations? Like when you had a problem, were you able to go to him, or maybe when he noticed like something was off, would he come to you? How was that communication between you two?
Both, I think. And back to your point about a good mentor, I think, good mentors should listen a lot, rather than tell. He was always, as a young person, he was always telling, but there were points where he could see I needed to stop. And so he would hear in these conversations things that I would say and he'd pick up on. And it'd be that back to the Gestalt thing. You mean like this, son? He'd clarify. On the other side of it, he passed away 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And man, I didn't realize how much we probably saw each other once or twice a month, maybe 3 times. And as he got more and more sick and more homebound, it was harder for us. Other than me going to the house, we used to go to breakfast twice a week or do something. I missed the little brief 45-minute breakfast, conversation that was always really thoughtful. And it was about deep things, my relationship with my wife, his relationship with my mom, our relationship with kids, his relationship with us, business, politics, religion. We talked about all that stuff. Even when I was a little kid, we'd have like these crazy conversations about Democrats and Republicans and the world, world leaders and what's going on. I mean, what person when they were 9 and 8 and 7 remembers Nixon and Watergate and Ford and Carter? And I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday because we would sit on the floor and we'd watch it. We talked about everything.
So let's talk about now who you mentor. So you've mentioned obviously your employees, peers in the industry like me, children, and other people in different groups. What's your mentorship style like?
I have to catch myself sometimes because I do obviously like to talk. My style is probably a lot more get to know you personally, get to know a person personally, understand the pressures and vision they have for their life, the things that are pulling on them. Because it's easy if it's a business mentorship or it's a family membership, because we've done new couples stuff with my wife at church and other things. Those situations become, it's all personal, but then you have to pull the business stuff in. And in some cases, it's supposed to be all business. But, humans aren't automatons. They have a lot of pressures and things that are going on at different times in their lives. And so I like to either, if it's a personal one, I like to, okay, what outside factors are affecting personally? If it's a young person that doesn't have any context, I try and get them to understand, what's your vision for life? Like, what do you see yourself as? I think so many people don't think about that. They think about the moment and what they want to get out of it, but they don't think 20 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years down the road and go, I want to have a family someday, or I'll never have a family, or whatever. And how does the experiences build to that vision of what you've got? And on the business side, I try and dig in personally at first, to understand on a human level, how do people make decisions? What was their life like? Who influenced them and all that? And then I shut up and say, okay, what is the stuff that you want to deal with? I try and let anybody I'm mentoring with, or it's a kid that has no context, or adult that's been doing it forever, the room to really kind of think through what they need to get to grow. Because that should be, any kind of mentor should be kind of bump up against that friend, understanding advisor, wise guide kind of thing, but also be personal enough to where you can understand all the variables in the conversation, or the drivers that are kind of making people think a certain way.
Earlier, you mentioned the Gestalt theory. Do you want to expand on that? Explain to the listeners what that is and how you use it.
Yeah, it's on the design side. Gestalt is just like, how it all kind of works together. Like everything works together, which and many people, especially in design today, kind of mess that up. But on this side of stuff, the idea of letting someone come to their conclusion without telling. And so there's always, the idea of, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Clarifying the question, clarifying questions, what do you see? All the kind of drawing out, and then letting someone come to their own solution. That's at least the experience we had, through EO, rather than the telling piece. That said, someone like me at some point is going to go, look, man, just tell me what to do. I think I know what I need to be doing, but what do I need to do? So I kind of sometimes throw Gestalt out the window.
It's hard, like especially both you and I like to talk and give our ideas. Ooh, it requires so much self-control, just like hold back. Like, I just want to say something.
If I pray for anything, it's patience to shut up sometimes and listen. That I would say that's one of my Achilles heels. I can sometimes get excited, and it's not to hear myself talk. I get excited about a thing, and I just like. And the other problem I have, this is what happened in my business school. There was one moment where like one of the girls who was very analytical, Michelle, she stood up in front of me one time as I was explaining, and I'm not getting any feedback. And so sometimes, Danny, if I don't get feedback, I'll lean in and I'll just keep talking until I get enough. And poor Michelle stood up. I'm explaining an answer, and she stood up, turned around, looked at me, and she's like, Bo, stop talking. What's your point? I was like, this is in front of my whole cohort. And I'm like, it was one of the best learning experiences on top of those learning experiences we were talking about.
Yeah.
It's like, man, collect your thoughts and make your point, and don't worry about the feedback, because that's always been a challenge for me. Like, it's not just liking to talk. It's sometimes, oh man, maybe I'm not getting across. And if I'm getting no feedback, it causes problems.
A similar point, but I often tell my children that, kind of like when they're rambling, it's like, hey, just stop a second. It's okay to be quiet. Think through first what you want to say, and then give it over.
Yeah. And I think in a busy world, it gets harder to let white space happen. The ums and the uhs and all that kind of stuff. There's one right there. We want to fill the space. And when you're in a mentoring relationship, if you're thinking about it right, you want to give something of value. And sometimes it comes out as words, and sometimes, to your point, it needs to just be quiet.
Yeah, leaning into the white space. So let's pivot a little bit. So what got me really excited, and why, besides for just in general, how much I like you and look up to you, you put out a blog post recently. The article called Mentorship and Growth and Hybrid Work Model, a CEO Perspective. And obviously I have the Mentorship podcast. So when I saw an article on mentorship, like, oh my gosh, I have to have Bo on. Recently, you posted on LinkedIn that you have a love-hate relationship with remote work. Can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, I think that one of the challenges that I have had, I am by nature an extrovert. Like, I get energy, like in the like biologic or physical sense, right? I get energy from being around people. And back to that feedback thing when we were talking about, we've wandered the wilderness now for 4 years. Almost 4. Has it been 4? It's been 4 years, hasn't it? Where we've been mostly hybrid and mostly remote. And a person like me that is trying to build an amazing business, I don't want to just have a business. I want to be extraordinary in that unique and extraordinary in the dictionary sense of those words, right? It's hard to get there when you don't see anybody. And it's hard to be motivated when you're like me. And so I've spent this last 4 years listening to my team and talking about things and looking at data and all this kind of stuff. And I'm realizing at least for me, and I had to check myself a lot in this, like, am I thinking this just because it's what I want to will to happen? And what I was noticing with my guys, and what prompted me to kind of write this article and go on this little odyssey that I'm on right now, is that we're not growing the way we need to grow. Now, that doesn't mean we have to sit next to each other all the time. But the reality is it's really hard. The extra effort it takes to be completely remote and still share a common bond across different people that learn different ways, doing different things, with an organization that got to be 65 people or 50, 65 people. It's bananas. I mean, it's hard. And it doesn't make it right, wrong, good or bad. That's what I was trying to in the article, but we set up just recently, Cynthia Dispatch, our director of brand experience, or managing director of brand experience, just set up a really intense mentorship program so that we can kind of combine some of this. So that was a little bit of, that's what's been going on. That's why I wrote the article and kind of looked at it, because I was missing out, but then I think my team was missing out. We weren't growing the way we should have grown, being completely remote like we were.
So tell me a little bit about the hybrid model that you're currently going through. I don't know if I told you the story, but a month or two before COVID hit, one of my key employees came into my office and she said, "Hey, Danny, I'm moving to Montana."
Yeah.
And she got really sad. She was crying. And I was like, "Ooh, how about you work remotely?" And she was like, I can't believe you actually said that. So yeah, let's talk about it. So we spoke about it. And then right away, I remember messaging like a whole bunch of people. I think Terry Hoffman as well. I was like, how do you manage remote people? Like, can this be successful? And I ended up buying one of the owl cameras. I know you have one of the owls, and and I found it hard. I found it hard to have some people on Zoom and some people in the room. And for me, it was really like, it's just easier for it to be one or the other. So tell me about, what does hybrid mean to you, and how do you deal with kind of that issue of not having, either extreme, but kind of have to deal with both?
Yeah, I think we're trying to perfect it. We were completely out of the office with some optionality to come in. And then in, I think, year 2, we said, look, 2 days a week, but they can be whenever. And then we said, look, 1 day a week with your team. And hey, leaders, be deliberate about which teams overlap. And 1 day a week potluck, so you can bump into some other people. Then we said, hey, look, certain functions need to be in here 3 days a week. like certain functions need to, and the team embraced it. And then most recently, because I've told you about kind of flagging business and things going on and our clients being semi-remote and really kind of distracted, I thought, look, we need to get together and be here. So we're right now, everybody's in the office 4 days a week.
Oh, wow.
And I've horribly disrupted my team and their lives. It is with great intention. And it is a 90-day sprint, and we're looking at it. So, Danny, we've run all of these different things to get to kind of what's going to work. And we've instituted all these different tools. We got mural boards, and we've leaned into Zoom, and we don't have office phones anymore. And we joke around in here, but every natural disaster was one way to untether. And then this one became a way to completely untether. And so we always had a kind of freedom of work. Like, if you needed to stay home and work, we were always okay with it. It was never a problem unless you had to collaborate with the team or go meet a client. It was like, hey man, I need focus time. I'm going to stay home. And with a lot of trust, we count full PTO days, but we don't count doctor's visits. We don't count going to coach your kids and picking them up from school or any of that kind of stuff. So we've always had this tendency of freedom of work. But when it became kind of a rule, or like this is what we're going to do, it got really weird. I mean, it got really strange. People felt constrained, or they felt so much freedom that they couldn't manage themselves. And there are not a lot of people, I'll be honest, not a lot of people have the discipline to work at home efficiently and effectively and do the extra work it takes to build relationships that we want to have in our organization, so that we're kind of fully in motion. It's been a pretty wild ride, but we're right now 4 days a week. I'm not going to tell you what I think we're going to land on, because if anybody listens to this, they'll be like, oh my God, Bo made a promise. But we're trying to figure it out, because there are some roles that really can be heads down. What we did learn, back to the mentoring piece, is if you're going to be at home 100% of the time doing work and just efficient, being efficient, it's going to be really hard. It's harder for someone like that in that role to really start to grow in their ability to lead an organization or collaborate or lead a team, not technically lead a team, but mentoring and growing the people around them and all that kind of stuff. It can be done. It just makes it more complicated and harder. That was the other thing. We noticed everybody was overscheduled. It was like little 20-minute meetings all day long for production people. And you're like, what is going on here? It's like, I had a question and I dropped it on your schedule 4 days later. It's like, that could have just literally been a pick up the phone or chat me and answer, but people didn't want to they don't want to disrupt somebody. And all of a sudden a project that couldn't move forward for 2 days because they couldn't find 20 minutes on your calendar, it was causing a lot of inefficiencies too.
Did you try to set up kind of like a mentorship structure or program in the hybrid remote sense?
Yeah, it actually been about 6 months in the making, and we're rolling it out now, even though we're going to bring it back. But we were doing it informally with we use EOS, so there was a lot of that. There were a lot of check-ins, a lot of talkings, but it was all mentorship within groups, and it was all kind of the formal check-ins, monthly check-ins with key people that really helped us. But there are some people here that want to grow, but they're not as visible all the time because they're out of the office or they're doing something. And, so I've got 2 formal mentors now. We've got a worksheet and this whole system that Cynthia's set up that we're going to do. That should have happened 2 years ago, where we dropped the ball. That should have happened 2-3 years ago. We should have seen that. That's what one of the, again, drivers for this article was that we saw that in our EOS platform. We made it a rock. It's been a 6-month kind of, define a program that works right. What's the burden? How many people? All that kind of stuff. And that mentorship beyond a check-in is really focused on helping people grow in their careers. And some of them are kind of family questions too that they're asking.
So I think you're lucky in the sense that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that most of your employees are in Houston. And therefore, for you to come back in the office, it wasn't like, suddenly over the past 4 years, you hired someone in Denver and in New York and in Canada. I guess for some people to go from remote back to in office could be pretty complicated. So for those people who have to work on a remote or hybrid model, at least for now, what advice would you give to them for interacting with people, setting up that mentorship program?
So in clarification, so we're 15% remote. We've got two teammates in Arizona, one in Boston, one in Pittsburgh, one in Chicago. And we've had more, with our kind of our layoffs earlier in the year, we had a handful more. And then we have a couple here that have like drive in from Waller. So, it's an hour and a half, so we have people that are not remote, but they would be much less inconvenienced if they were remote. And then we got the other 80%, are local enough to where it's not horrible to come in. We've had to really lean into check-ins and different pieces that way. If I were a remote employee, right now I do a breakfast with Bo, and I do one at Slow Pokes over here around the corner for people that are local. And then an hour later, I do an online, breakfast with Bo, because some people are in their West Coast time and other East Coast time. So I got to do it like 11 or 10, at 10. So I don't affect the lunch, but I don't get somebody up too early. From a leadership standpoint, that's just a general mentoring, where we just talk about what's going on in the business, what's going on in the industry, what's going on in their lives, and how we could be better, or what any questions they have. And we talked politics the last time and how the election was going to affect the business, because those are things that are on top of mind internally. So if I were for someone outside the office, I'd pick a mentor. I just I was that kind of guy. So I'd just say, hey, Jimmy or Sue, let's get together and, do you mind giving me 30 minutes a month? There I can kind of pick your brain and talk to you about stuff. And quite frankly, many people want to do that. They want to connect on a human level. That's something I wish some of our remote people would have done, and we encourage it. But now that we have this formal program, they can kind of lean into it pretty easy. And then organizations, like I put in the article, organizations really need to, if you're going to be remote a significant amount of time, you've got to put these things in place so that you can keep some cultural connection. So it doesn't turn into a transactional relationship with your employees where they're just working, because the minute they get more money, they're going to be gone.
Did you hire remotely before 2020?
No, the two we freelanced remotely, but the two people that were remote were moved by their spouses, and we loved them so much that we just went, like you, Danny, we wanted to keep them. And we were able to we had, our test case with a woman went to East Texas, and she's a huge part of our company for a long period of time. And then, our digital marketing manager's in Boston, because he married a Massachusetts girl, and the heat, she found a great job up there that fit her better, because Houston's just weird, where she couldn't get into what she wanted to. And so she went up there, and Cajun Chris followed her up there, and he's freezing 10 months of the year, but it's all good.
His loss. So with 20% remote, 80% in the office, have you had any complaints in general of like factions or, hey, I'm missing out, I don't feel like, do people speak up about that at all?
A little. Our culture has been, it's been a rough year. So our culture's taken a big hit. But man, people here have always been really helpful and really kind and really open-minded. And that extends then to the remote team. And while there is some disconnect we don't get to see them at happy hours and stuff like that, there is also a willingness to reach out. And so, some of the people who are remote are resource management, or they're on the digital marketing team, they're called in all the time to discussions and conversations. That one of the reasons I set up the breakfast, though, every 2 weeks, was because they were feeling a little bit like we're bringing everybody back to the office. And the thing that I didn't realize was, like, they freaked out. They're like,
yeah,
oh, you're bringing everybody in the office, and back to me being a good leader and mentor of my business, I had to oh, wait, okay, I heard this one thing that makes complete sense. Let's have this breakfast and they can clarify things. And then I also talked to my leaders about making sure, but again, with EOS and L10s and, the weekly check-ins and all that kind of stuff, man, there are a lot of excuses to pull in remote workers and people that aren't, in the same proximity. And that's been really helpful.
But it does show you that you do have to be intentional about it, right? Because
Very
if
much
you're just
so.
working in the office and do everything you need, you could potentially forget. But if that's
Sure.
why you need those systems and processes.
Oh, and being fair, I'll stumble over names. There was a point where when I wasn't doing these breakfasts, I was getting to a point where I was like, oh man, I don't see Denasia. Who's that does this? And I'm old, and so I start forgetting things. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need to meet with these people more often, because it's not the kind of relationship I want. And so, to your point, you have to be really deliberate and thoughtful.
All right, we are going to move to our top 3. So 3 things that you've mentioned that are really important to you is family and coaching, running and exercise, and consuming tons of podcasts. Would love to know your favorite experience, or just in general what you like with regards to that category. So let's start with family and coaching.
On the family and coaching piece, it was kind of funny, like you were reading off all that stuff. So when I got my MBA, we had 2 kids. I'd quit my job. I left my partnership. I was starting my own business. I was AIGA co-president. So I would only do it with a co, because I was like, man, I got too much going on. And I coached every team. I was actually the starter for the swim team, because I wanted to get the swim meets done so that we weren't up there all night. And I did all that, one, because I love coaching, back to the mentoring and kind of teaching young people and pulling people together and connecting them and getting all these families and stuff. But I wanted to spend time with my kids, and I felt that the more I could at least control the schedule when we practiced, when the games were, I ended up being commissioner of basketball league, we could spend time together. And what I didn't realize out of coaching was that, I'd be dealing with one situation with 8-year-olds on a basketball floor, and I'd be dealing with one situation with 30-year-olds in the business. And it was kind of the same situation in some instances. So I was really able to kind of use that. And that's kind of the way I think. I'm always like, take from here, do this. Oh, that was an interesting experience. How do I use that here? And the coaching piece was awesome for me, fully rewarding. Just when you'd see these kids light up, that they did something that they didn't think they could do, or we won a game that they didn't think they could win, or they built relationships to where they were just all doing their stuff, or they get to a point where they practiced so well that they didn't need to be coached anymore. Back to what a good mentor should be, teach you how to mentor yourself and coach yourself. That's been awesome. There's a huge family component for me. We do a lot around sports, but it's more for the team part than it was for the competition and get a scholarship kind of thing. Although my kids all had chances and they all chose not to, which is perfectly fine for me.
Cool. And what about running and exercise?
I've always played sports. I've always done stuff. I think as a leader, you just need to check out. there are just moments where you need a clear space on your own. And I didn't get that in basketball. And then when I turned 50, I had to stop playing. COVID happened. And then, just kind of like, so now I do golf and whatnot. But I started running at 40, and some of it was a physical outlet. But that quiet time of just spending 30 minutes or an hour, or eventually I ran a marathon with my daughter, and overcoming something. And now I have to ice bath, so, but that quiet time of just thinking or putting a podcast in and going off and running, or a book is really kind of special to me, because with my kids, when we had 4 in the house and business was going and stuff was happening and all this other crazy stuff I do, it was really hard to get that time other than the shower or the bathroom. It's like, and so that run in the morning almost became kind of a sacred time for me, just because it was quiet and there was nothing else around, and I could just really get in my head and think a little bit clearly. And then I ran into I don't know if what's it called? 2020, the 5 a.m. Club. It's a book, and it kind of breaks up. You start the day with 20 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes of exercise, 20 minutes of learning. I really try to style those things, but I combine the running and the learning, and I'll go for 40 minutes on that one.
That's really, really good advice. And then finally, you love podcasts and books. Any podcasts or books that you can recommend to the listeners?
Great book right now, if you're really stressed out about the world and the current environment, is The Storm Before the Calm. It's an interesting discussion about the overlap of changes in culture, changes in economics, changes in politics. It makes me feel a lot better about what's happening. But I think about it in our business, and Danny, you and I were talking about AI and the changes that are going to happen through that. It's just a different way of thinking. My portfolio was hand painted. I learned how to draw with a bar of soap, a mouse, and learned how to draw with this thing, and bent the computer and technology to my will for a large part of my career. We're in that same phase, but it's coming at us faster, and that's a little intimidating. On the podcast side, I'm listening a lot right now because I read a lot of books on founding fathers and leaders and different things. The Musk book was amazing. The Isaacson book, all of Isaacson's books are great. But I'm listening to Founders podcast, and it I can't remember his name, but he reads a book and then he gets all excited about whoever, and it's incredible listening to it. And the other one, How I Built This, is another one that I listen to, because as an entrepreneur, and I just stayed in I can't remember if it was Founders or How I Built This. I think it was How I Built This. I just stayed in a graduate hotel. The podcast talked to him about how he created that concept. And it was incredible, man. It was so awesome. And it's inspiring because I'm having to reimagine this business for today. And it's interesting to listen to stuff about Sam Walton and people, dead or barely alive, that have done this kind of thing, and they're the things that drove them without actually having to read the whole book. And then also contrasting that with today, Musk and Founders and the kind of How I Built This kind of stories that the entrepreneur tells, or that are written about the entrepreneur, because it's a challenge right now, managing all these changes in culture, managing the changes in work, all that kind of stuff. And so I've really leaned into, rather than consuming big long books, I'm starting to do these podcasts. The other one that is just cracking me up to no end is Smartless, with Jason Bateman and Arnell and the guy from Will and Grace. Sorry, that's going to date me too. But Sean, I can't remember his name. It is an absolute riot, and it's a great checkout. And they've got great guys. So I'm always learning, always trying to. Again, it gives me more context, gives me more to talk about with other people. In the point where I'm mentoring or working with somebody, it's not just me and old people books, I'm trying to stay up with the times a little bit. I've really enjoyed leaning into those a lot. And the other one's the Wall Street Journal's got a great little podcast it's called The Journal, and it's little 20-minute snippets of what's going on in the world. And I think they're super unbiased, and they're just thoughtful as heck, and they're really interesting because they introduce you to one little thing, like 60 Minutes used to when I was a kid, or that kind of deal, where it's like, oh, this is cool. So anyway, I'm just always learning and consuming, but then processing and trying to put it into context for my family or for work or, my life.
Well, your passion for growth and learning and changing is really, really awesome and inspiring.
This is awesome, Danny, man. Thank you. I really am impressed with what you've built and what you're doing and all the things, all the people that you're impacting through your teaching and, this kind of medium. I know it's important to you, not just to be producing, but to having an impact on others. And kudos to you, man. I mean, it's really amazing what you're doing. And I know it's hard to run the business, teach in school, and congratulations on all your success to this point and growing your family. You should be pretty proud of where you're at.
Thanks, Bo. I really, really appreciate it.
You got it.
All right. Thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time. Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.